Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to part 3 of the tutorial for chapter 5 of the Zelle Python book 3rd edition. And in this part, we're going to be doing a program. I forgot to put the .py on the name. It's called 2/3 batch accumulator. That's an interesting name. So let's look at the requirements. From a text file, read a series of lines of input containing floating point numbers separated by commas. And I think when I was done, space. Separated by a comma and a space. Comma plus space. How's that? Okay. For each line, calculate a value that is 2/3 of the total of the amounts. Okay. Why 2/3? Well, because if you look at the next requirement, print the total rounded to 2 decimal places. Well, I wanted to force a floating point total that was likely to need rounding. And 2/3 will do that. Okay? That's the only reason why we're taking 2/3. All right. So we're going to do the standard stuff. We're going to create a main. And we'll put a pass in it for now. And we'll call main. Okay, good. All right. So, how are we going to do the input file? Well, another approach to getting data in that they show in the textbook is having the user type in the file name. And typically in that case, you have the user type in the file name. You put the file in the same directory as the program. That's what I did in the last one when I had an input file, and it opens it up. So the last time we hard-coded the file name. This time I'm going to begin. I'm going to leave my comment in for housekeeping. So I'm going to throw that in, and I'm just going to say this. I'm going to get the name of the file from the user. It's a fairly ugly way to do it, but at least we're not hard coding it, which is even uglier. And then we're going to do an open. Okay? And you'll remember every time we open a file, we're going to want to close it just before we leave our program. So I'm going to have a cleanup here in which we're going to close in file. All right, that's good. So what about the code itself? Well, I'm going to show you the code from my previously baked version, and then we'll walk through it, okay? Let's take a look. Okay, so what's kind of interesting here is I call this processing and output, and maybe it's an input process output loop. So maybe we should have called this input process output loop. Okay? This is kind of characteristic of input comma process comma and output loop. That's what this is, and this is pretty much a hallmark of a batch-oriented program. again, this is a batch-oriented program. It's a batch accumulator. Okay. All right. So what are we going to do? Well, we're just going to use for in to iterate over the lines. Okay, because what really works well about that is we want to process it a line at a time. The 2/3 value that we want is for the line. Okay. So what do we want to do? Well, let's get the entries on that line. Okay. And so we decided we were going to do line split, but just to be a little different this time, I decided that I would have the data be separated by comma space. So let's see if I can find my data. It's called accumulator data.txt. And this too will be in the starter files for your assignment because you're going to be working on it too. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paste in accumulator data.txt, and you're going to see that the values are separated by comma space. Okay. And I put some interesting values in here. I gave them all, I made like they were all dollars and cents. I put in an integer all by itself just to show that you can do that. I've got lines that only have a single entry on them, line 2 and line 3. I didn't feel that I had to give you a fractional sense because my 2/3 thing is going to generate fractional sense, and then you're going to have to format the result. Okay, so that's what we're accumulating. Okay, so we're going to take each line and split it using comma space. Okay, and then we want to accumulate the entries on the line. Okay, so entries is the name of the list that you get back when you split it. Okay, so the entries total is 0.0. I gave it a float value because I wanted to document that this is we're accumulating floating point values. Okay. So then I say for entry and entries. Okay, this is how I iterate over the list of entries. Entries total plus equal. I want to call float on entry. Well, why do I call float? Well, I can't call int because it can be a floating point value, and I want to convert the string that entry is into a floating point value. And I could have said entries total equals entries total plus float entry, but this plus equal shortcut, I think I mentioned before, I was very resistant to it when I first saw this in the C language, and now it's my friend. So it's kind of interesting how constructs that perhaps you don't take a liking to at first, you come to take a liking to later. So in order to calculate the 2/3 of the final value, I've been so I say that the entries total times 2/3 equals the final value that we want to print. So what I did was I multiplied it by 2.0 divided by 3.0. Would it have worked if I said 2 and 3? Yeah, it would have worked because it's a mixed expression, and entries total is a floating point value. And so it would have converted the others to floating point in order to do it. And yet I think this really makes good documentation. Okay, so did I absolutely have to? No. Is it good documentation? Yes. So now, final value is the value that I want to print. It is the 2/3 value, okay? But I would like to I would like to round it to 2 decimal places. So here's what I decided to do. I didn't have all this in the beginning, but I decided I wanted to print a grouping of things. Like, because we're doing this for line after line, it's a little bit hard to see what we're doing unless we actually print the line that we're trying to total. So I started with the blank line to separate the groupings. Okay, and then I printed the line itself. Remember, we have to pull off the new line character or we're going to get double spacing. And then I printed before rounding final value, and then I said after rounding, and I used the format string, and I said final value. Okay, and of course we go around and we do this. All right, so I've got too many blank lines there. Once we're in main, we only want to, we can skip a line for drama in between parts of code that are inside of main, but the Python style wants to reserve 2 blank lines for separating functions and classes from surrounding code. Okay, so 2 blank lines is going to get a squiggly gray line. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Let's give this a test. Okay, so I'm gonna right click, and I'm going to run 2/3 batch accumulator, and it's going to say what's the name of the file, and it was called accumulator underscore data dot text. Accumulator underscore data dot text. Okay. Well, it ran a lot of good things. Let's open that up and see what it looks like. So it looks like it did the right number of lines. Okay. And so the first one was like 3.25, 6.25, 10.25, 10.75. So 2/3 of that is a little over 7. Yeah, that's a reasonable answer. And look at this repeating decimal fraction, and then we rounded it to 2 decimal places. We only had a single value here, 9. 2/3 of it is 6, which without the rounding comes to 6.0. With the rounding, 6.00. 0 works, and when you use the rounding to format it, 0.00. The next one, again, a big repeating fraction, gets rounded down to 6.51. And then the last one, 15, 2/3 of it is 10, it gets rounded to 10.00. So that seems to be working just fine. I did have a problem in my original test data. I did have a blank line. So I had a line, let me show this to you. On my data, I said, oh, let's have a blank line between 1 and 2. Because you sometimes will have that. Okay. And it was very sensitive to that. If I run this again, it'll blow up. Accumulator data.text. Kaboom. Okay, so I'm going to, I decided that I wasn't going to make my program that robust. Okay, I was going to allow it to be susceptible to that problem, and I was going to leave that out of the test data. And in the long term, we're going to learn some coding to make sure that we don't blow up if we happen to have a blank line in something like this. But for right now, we'll trust the user to give us data with no blank lines. Okay? And again, I changed the data, so let me run this again. Oh, I don't want to run the test data, I want to run the program. So run the program again and call it accumulator data .text, and it runs just fine. Okay, so in your version of this that you're ready to do now, you're going to use a different fraction. You're not going to be using 2/3. Okay, it's going to be different. And you're going to be rounding to a different number of decimal places. It's not going to be 2. You're not going to format it to 2 decimal places. It's going to be different. But apart from that, it's going to be the same general approach. You're going to use the same test data. Okay, so good luck with that, and I'll see you when I come back for part 4.